Welcome to Let's Learn 2024 D&D, where I go over a different rule of the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition in 2024. This is for people looking for a quick rule refresher or looking to get into the game. Today, we're talking about where to start, what the game is at its core, and some terminology. So let's learn. The whole point of this video is to give you a basic understanding of what a tabletop role-playing game is and some of the terminology that appears in Dungeons & Dragons and some of my later videos. So if you are somewhat familiar with that, go ahead and go to the next video in the series if you're just trying to learn the rules. This is to teach people what the system is really about. So before I get into some of these explanations, I want to say welcome to the very awesome tabletop RPG community. It is a community where people use their imagination, creativity, math skills, and funny voices to create and build different scenarios or play characters and use your imagination. So you want to get into Dungeons & Dragons, but you don't really understand what it is. Dungeons & Dragons came out in the 1970s and is developed through a couple editions over the course of the years. The most recent version, 2024 5th edition, is a small rules update and cleanup of the 5th edition version that came out in 2014. Now, you may not know all of what that means, but it's a start. Dungeons & Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game where you take on the role of a character that you make up and pretend to be, and go on an adventure with a couple of your friends who are playing other characters. Whether you want to be a mighty fighter, a stealthy rogue, a divine worshipping cleric, or an adept wizard, you can make the perfect hero or protagonist that you wish to play and go on an adventure with. The game of Dungeons & Dragons is at its core a game that relies on imagination and group storytelling. There are two different ways that you can play the game. As a player, taking on the role of a character within the game, think of one of the protagonists of a popular book or movie. Or you can play as the Dungeon Master, the storyteller and referee who takes the role of the monsters and non-player characters, bringing life into the world for the player characters. Regardless of whether you want to be a player or the Dungeon Master, let's get a basic understanding of some of the terminology that will get tossed around when you start looking into the game or watch the rest of the episodes in the series. While it all might appear a little overwhelming at first, the game is actually rather easy to play once you learn some of the lingo. Like we just talked about, there is a dungeon master and there are players. This is you and the people you are playing with at the table. For the convenience of understanding, we will refer to you as a player going forward, and we presume you are playing with the dungeon master for the first time. The next term we get to is a character. A character is the protagonist that you will make to go on adventures in the world your dungeon master creates. Since your character is a person you will roleplay as, they may not share your exact personality, gender, age, or even species. You have the choice to make your character how you like, and you use the rules of the player's handbook to make your character how you like. An example is my first D&D character. I made a half-elf who was basically twice my age when I first made my character. Next, we'll cover dice. Typically, when someone thinks of dice, they think of a 6-sided dice. In Dungeons & Dragons, we use 4-sided dice, 6-sided, 8, 10, 12, and 20-sided dice. The primary dice used in the game of Dungeons & Dragons is the 20-sided dice, which is rolled primarily to see if we succeed or fail on something we want to do. A common way to refer to these dice are D20 or D8 or D something else, establishing that it's a dice and then the amount of sides on it. Most tabletop RPGs involve you sitting around a table with a couple sheets of paper for something like a character sheet, as well as with dice, and maybe some maps, miniatures. Not all of those things are necessary to play the game since it's a storytelling game. Sometimes combats and narrative take place just based on the mind. They all take place in your head, just based on the descriptions of your dungeon master. That style is called theater of mind. And I think the theater of mind style goes to show that you truly can play this game with very little resources. I'll explain a simple rundown of how the gameplay works so you can get an understanding of how it goes. Your dungeon master would describe a scene in which your character is playing in. This could be a town filled with townsfolk or a dark cave in which you can barely see. You and the other players at the table, taking on the role of your characters, would then respond as if you were in the setting yourself. In the town, you might talk to your friends' characters as if you had just met. Or in the cave, you might tell the dungeon master you want to see if you could fashion a torch to light up the cave. These are very basic examples, but it serves the point to let you know that you could do any number of things within the game. In other videos I make, I'll go over the mechanics of the game and explain what a character sheet is and how you fill it out. Before calling this very introductory video done, I want to bring up my resources for these videos. As I go over things, I'll utilize the 2024 5th edition Player's Handbook along with my general knowledge of previous editions to hopefully simplify each of the mechanics and rules to a point where you feel you can make a character sheet with ease. If you have any questions about my history with the game or other tabletop RPGs, go ahead and ask in the comments and I'd be happy to answer. As far as resources you would want to pick up and read for any of the stuff that I'm talking about, you would want to get a copy of the Player's Handbook, which I'll show a picture of. If you're interested in being a dungeon master, you might want to also consider a monster manual and maybe a dungeon master's guide. As a player, you probably would need just the player's handbook and be completely fine with that. And even then, whoever you're going to play with as your dungeon master might have one. And with that, thank you all for listening to the Let's Learn. Go ahead and leave a like and subscribe if you haven't. If there's another topic you want to cover for the 2024 rules of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, or have a question about a topic, this would be the first place to start asking questions. The goal of this is to be educational and informative to help introduce the game to people who may not have played it before or want to get back into it. So thank you guys.